I think that it all starts by understanding the space and the aspect. We have a global pride campaign in Syngenta Group. However, we understand that in some places, as I mentioned before, this is illegal. So what we're trying to do this year is to have our pride campaign for those countries where pride is accepted and the LGBTQI plus community is accepted, but then have a respect campaign for the countries where we are not able sometimes to even speak about the topic.
Hello and welcome to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders. This is the show where I speak with the most influential and thought-provoking, inspirational leaders of today and unearth their unique stories of diversity and inclusion to help inspire, educate and motivate others to make the world a better place. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Ruben Alejandro Ramirez. Ruben is the Group Head of Diversity and Inclusion for Syngenta Group. He's recently been listed in the European Diversity Awards and also as the most influential D&I practitioner, one of a few select individuals in Europe. His current role involves spearheading design and implementation of the group diversity and inclusion strategy for over 53,000 employees worldwide. Today, we're going to be diving deep into why it's key to make corporate life a safe space, but also the criticality of global diversity and inclusion strategies. Welcome to the show, Ruben.
Thank you, Leila. I am very happy to be with you and also to be able to reach out to your audience. I know your podcast is quite important in the DI space, so it's really an honor. Thanks for having me.
Well, right back at you, Ruben. And I remember the first time we were very kindly introduced by the lovely Ronit. We ended up spilling over on time. It felt like a podcast. And I said, Ruben, you've got to join us on the show. You'll be wonderful. So for those of our audience who are tuning in, who perhaps don't know you as well as I do, it would be wonderful for you just to give a little bit of a whistle-stop tour of how you came to be in the role that you are today. Because it was a rather unusual but serendipitous journey, wasn't it?
Yes, I think this is one of the topics I like to talk about the most. I am from Mexico. I was born and raised in Mexico. I also have an Spanish nationality because of my grandparents. And I've always wanted to have an international career. Since I was very young, I started doing exchange programs. I think the first one I did was when I was 12. I was for 3 weeks living in US. Then it became a year when I was in high school. And then I did another year in Canada while college. This helped me really open my mindset of everything that was out there. And I was ready to reach out to. So when I started my career, I always wanted to work for a multinational company, and I was really keen in developing my career in marketing. I think this is one of my passions. I really love doing all the customer strategy, and my expertise while doing marketing was in customer orientation and customer intimacy. So I got to develop a very successful career. I was hired by Syngenta in 2015, where I was relocated to Panama. In Panama, I spent about 4 years. That's where I met my husband. I'm openly gay. And then we relocated back to Mexico for a couple of years. And while I was in Mexico, I was not ready to settle down back again in my country. So I was like, no, we need to find another international opportunity. So while looking for a position within Syngenta in the global team in Switzerland for marketing, I came in to see the position for global head for diversity and inclusion. And I'm like, oh my God, this is one of my passions. I was, at that time, I was the president for the D&I Council in Mexico. And when I joined Syngenta, I was also part of the D&I Council for Latin America North. So I've been actively working for D&I for the past 7 years. And also by being gay, I was quite active representing the LGBTQI plus community in the different countries that I lived. So when I saw the job description, I was not very sure. I was meeting all of the different aspects of it, but I say, oh, really, it's just applying. Let's see what happens. And if I don't get a call back, that's okay. I will keep looking for my marketing position. So after 3 weeks, probably, I got an email from the recruiters. This is within my own company. So I part of this network and I know the spaces. And I was quite amazed that they wanted to talk to me. And they say, look, the hiring manager wants to have a direct interview with you. So we want to be having another conversation. When can you do it? So we set a time. The conversation was like you and I, Leila. It just flowed. We were just talking about different topics, about our passion, our dreams, and most important, why do we want to make a better world through making a better company and through focusing in D&I. And I think this was what really connected with us. And then I was called for a second interview and then a final interview with our chief human resources officer at the time. So the process went really, really fast. And this is where you know that some things are meant to be. And when things happen so easy, it's because you're going to the right path. And I think that this is the right path because I have seen myself into many intersectionalities. So as I said, I'm homosexual, but I'm also left-handed. I have ADHD, which makes me neurodivergent. I am from Mexico, which also puts me in the Latin community out in the world. I'm also I'm also bald, which takes me like in a physical traits to a different underrepresented group. So I can also understand some of the body shaming that people can have. There are so many that we are made out of so many intersectionalities that when you realize you can fall in so many spaces, you understand the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And for me, it started by being part of the LGBT community, but then it has shown me different ways for me to connect to people, to relate, and then to keep wanting to make my company, my organization, a better place and a safer place for everyone. And I know that this reflects directly on how we impact society, and with that, how do we create a better world for everyone, which at the end of the day is my main purpose nowadays.
Wow, Ruben, well, that is absolutely some whistle-stop tour. And, you know, I really commend you for how you so beautifully weave those elements of your personal life, your purpose, you know, being homosexual, ADHD, which I have to say, by the way, being dyslexic is, I think, something really to be so proud of. You know, back in the day, being dyslexic, ADHD, it was something which was perhaps, you know, had negative connotations. But actually, the pride and the difference with which you come to the table and the, you know, real open, honest vulnerability, I think is to be commended, because not only does it give others the opportunity to feel they can be their true selves, but also you can see how the career that you have had, it has really been very focused on driving forward within purpose, kind of at the heart of all those different elements. And you know, I think again, historically, we talk about, oh, follow our purpose, and it's almost, it was previously deemed as something a little bit fluffy. Well, actually, how you've described this is very much around doing great for business, but also doing great purposeful things. And thankfully, we are in a time in business where it's great business to do good, ultimately.
I think that we're in that specific moment of times where we are building better businesses for everyone, and that having inclusive leadership capabilities are the most wanted right now in the system. So I think we're on that track. We're probably at some point being a leader was more focusing on results and outcomes, but now it's not a different space where we can still bring the results and outcomes and yet be inclusive leaders where we respect differences, where we understand that not all populations need the same benefits or the same conditions or the same ways of working. Now we are understand that we're all different, and that those differences are what builds a great company. So I think we're now leveraging those positive aspects of it. And please, when I talk about my purpose, don't get me wrong, I still have a 9 to 5 job. I do have back-to-back meetings. I have a lot of things to do. I stress and sometimes I'm overloaded. But at the end of the day, when I go back and think, what am I doing different is really where I get re-energized of keep wanting to do more and also keep expressing my vulnerabilities for people to relate with me, not to judge me. I have learned that when you come with a very strong vulnerability and love about yourself, or love, self-love, this is where you can really create an impact, because people, most people won't have my same intersectionalities, but they will have their own. And by being so open about mine, it really helps other people to come as they are, right? Just to come forward, knowing who they are and what they can bring to the table, which for me is the most important part when working with underrepresented groups in our company.
I'm going to pick up on something that you mentioned there around inclusive leadership capabilities. I absolutely concur, by the way, and I think as time has gone on, there is this realization from leadership and from business that really strong and high emotional intelligence, and often having those vulnerabilities, is the strength that we absolutely need within business teams and leadership of the future. Perhaps it wasn't as valued in the past, and like you say, you know, of course we're always looking at business outcomes and results, but ultimately in this modern world that we live in, there's so many other things that contribute to what is important. Now, I've just been studying the wealth economy, which is all a framework around sustainable prosperity beyond GDP. And here we're looking at a lot of the different capitals, a number of which you've already mentioned: human capital, knowledge capital, social capital. All of these capabilities aren't factored in to GDP. And I think there is a rising recognition, certainly, that the social aspects of ESG play a very, very important strategic role in terms of global and broader global strategy, which leads me nicely to kind of ask more about your thoughts when it comes to corporate life, and how global D&I strategic planning can really make a difference to the business and the bottom line. And I ask this with the view of, not only your marketing career and your marketing hat, but also the D&I strategy when it comes to targeting, segmenting, and connecting with audiences. Because I know this is something you are so focused on at present, Ruben.
Yes, great question. And I concur with you in the fact that human capital has probably now one of the biggest priorities for us to understand how we can develop, engage, retain, and growth, right? Not only in our businesses, but also in our societies. If we have more educated people on what we need to really achieve as a society, we will be able to make better decisions and have better outcomes at a less cost, right? I always try not to forget that at the end of the day, we're multinational organizations where we also have a business outcome, and also we have some cost efficient strategies that we need to put in place, right? So by not retaining those people that are bringing innovation, which most of the time come from diverse communities, we are falling into an important cost, right? Attrition, retraining, just not having the positions in place for a specific amount of months, that's also costing us. So how do we really understand and leverage the fact that having the correct messages, the correct development, the correct strategies for retaining our population also is giving us a better way to accomplish our business goals, right? And on the second part, I do believe that DEI is one of these areas where you have so many things to accomplish, and everyone has an opinion on how DEI should be rolled out, or what should we be aiming to get through DEI. So there are many opinions, there are many ways of working, there are many things that we need to achieve, there are many areas of focus. For some people is gender rate, for some other people is racial equity, for some people is about well-being. So how us as DEI professionals can we manage all of these aspects? And it's not easy, because also we don't have, as every area in a business, we have limited resources. So what can you do with what you have with all these expectations? So for me, I think the most important part is to define a strategy. And just like any other business strategy, how are you going to use your resources, and how are you going to reach to your target audience? So part of what we have done, we have created a DEI strategic framework where we understand the levers that we have, the outcomes that we want to get, but also the areas of work and the KPIs that we want to measure. So if you can think about it, it's just like any other business strategy where you will have covered all the different areas for you to focus to. Then what we did in the first 24 months was a very scalable strategy where we brought resources in place like online trainings, webinars for all our global community, messages from the top leaders, and also we understood the importance of leaders representing DEI. This is like our top leaders. And with that, we were able to create a message on how important was DEI for us in Syngenta Group. Now, I can tell you that if you go to any of our sites or you talk to any of our employees, they will recognize DEI as a primary topic. Probably we don't have the most inclusive places yet or the most psychological safe places, but we're in progress. At least our population now understand when any of the leaders talk about DEI, what we're trying to intend. On the second, on our next stage, what we're focusing right now is how do we make this awareness into accountability. I don't think we're going to be able to succeed in any related matter of DEI if we don't recognize that accountability is one of the most important elements. Not accountability only by the leaders or by the DEI area or by the HR team, but accountability of the individuals, managers, leaders, on how they really prepare their teams and their spaces for them to be inclusive and equitable, of course, diverse too. So I think that right now what we're trying to do is understanding where are we at a company. We're creating a point-based system to identify which of our countries are doing better and which ones do we need to have a more attention to them. But also we are creating segments for our population in a way that we can identify who are really oriented to DEI and who probably are not so oriented because they have other priorities related to the business, right? By understanding the different segments, we are able also to create a way for us to reach out to our populations in the way they need it. Probably not everyone has 1 hour to connect to a webinar. Probably not everyone has I don't know, 30 minutes every other week to create online training. Probably they have 7, 8 minutes to listen to a small podcast with the specific messages while they are on the road going to meet their customers, right? So we need to understand who is this population for us to bring the messages in the right packaging, right? Also, we need to understand what are the main priorities of those business. Is it specific on one of the many dimensions that we have? For example, gender rate. Do we need to increase our gender rate in the leadership positions in this specific site? And then how do we create succession plans that include a gender balance option for us to make these succession plans? So I think there are so many topics and so many areas where we could do more that if we don't start identifying them, then we're just diluting the strategy. We're just talking about so many different topics, but not having a focal point for each of them. So I think this is where I can relate with my marketing experience and my marketing background for me to really bring a strategy that can differentiate from others and is not only now into the scalable aspect, but more into how do we double click to understand the real needs, and then how do we deliver the message for all of our different segments in our group.
Ruben, the way that you've articulated that is absolutely spot on, and you've covered so many different areas. Awareness in terms of accountability, all of the different line managers, but also, what is essentially kind of the trickle effect, the importance of bringing in that top level, those C-suite leaders into the conversation in order for that to filter down throughout the organization. But not only that, what I really liked was you talking about the D&I strategic framework and these levers. And we're talking about, commercial levers to be able to drive success, to scale strategy, online training, external amplification of engagement, as well as looking at kind of even the point-based system. For everyone that knows me well knows that I love numbers. I love numbers, and the fact that, you know, numbers, data and accountability actually has a really beautiful marriage with storytelling and, you know, the why and the purpose. And that is really, just for anyone who's listening, such a great summary of looking at a strategy for D&I, but also having, as you said, Ruben, these real focal points for each of these areas, because we try and boil the ocean and we don't look at specifics when we fail at everything. And so actually looking at the differentiating factors and marketing as well. Again, I'm going to sound terribly biased here, but the role of the global diversity and inclusion professional, I think, is one that remains one that has, you know, literally, you know, you know, it needs to influence mile wide, it needs to influence mile deep. It often is operating with limited resources, and so engaging with all of these different communities in an intersectional way, looking at marketing comms, you know, and so on and so forth. It really, you know, it is a far more complex role than I truly believe people have an understanding or sometimes respect for. Now,
It is like, sorry to interrupt you. It is,
no,
and
go
I think
ahead.
this is very important to mention, because I think that at this point on the DI journey, we have identified that there's a lot of frustration. Shifting a culture, shifting mindset, creating a change management strategy as big as DI can take many years, right? And this can be frustrating in the sense that you won't see the results immediately. But I think that if you have a measurable strategy where you can see the progress and you can understand where are you having quick wins, where are you having great progress, and when you're not having it, it will be easier for professionals to know that there's still ways to make it happen, and just to ignore that frustration. I've talked to different DI professionals, and most of the time it is like, well, I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it, right? Because it takes so long, and sometimes leaders from business, they don't have this view of the long term, while things are slowly happening at the core of the business, which are the employees. So I think it's very important for us to have a notion of where do we want to go, of those changes that we need to implement, but also being able to see the progress. Because if you don't see the progress, then it could be very demotivating. As you say, it's a challenging situation, and sometimes we don't have clear the need for a clear strategy.
Mm. And there's some very valid points there. When we talk about this in terms of change and transformation, often I see the light bulb go on within other business functions, because change and transformation is something that we know that's in our business literature, right? But when we look at diversity and inclusion in the context of change and transformation programs, I think it starts to make more sense to the broader business community, because you don't expect change, culture, transformation, all these kind of things to happen overnight. But absolutely, I empathize, and I have many a conversation with CDOs and D&I practitioners who are saying, God, there is real frustration here. But as you say, Ruben, you know, really looking at KPIs and tangible measurement metrics in order to then report to the business and say, look, hey, we've come from here to here, and you can see this, is a really good way to keep the momentum up and to try and steer away from frustration, which frankly are completely normal given the magnitude of this role. Talk to me in brief about some of the areas that you think are key to measure and how you would measure some of the progress moves. And then I'd love us to talk a little bit more about Pride and LGBTQ+, because of course we're releasing this podcast around such an important month.
Well, Leila, I think there are so many metrics that anyone can use to identify progress. What for me is, how do we group these metrics to really identify where we need to do more progress, right? So right now, we are measuring gender rate, gender pay gap, We're also identifying number of leaders and employees that have been trained in different aspects of DI. We have an offering of about 18 online courses in regarding different topics, but we also have assessments that help us identify our level of inclusion, or also our cultural differences. We have 4 campaigns throughout the year where we talk about International Women's Day, Pride, persons with disabilities, and we have Inclusion Week, where we talk about different topics. So we also measure the number of people that are connecting, the engagement, the questions, the comments, and also we have an annual survey, which is our inclusion index, where we understand topics like psychological safety, belonging, being able to bring an opinion. We also measure our compliance cases. So we are building a formula for us to identify, depending the number of employees that are engaged in our activities, or also the inclusion index and the gender balance, for us to identify where do we need to do more work, right? So I think there's not like a formula recommended. I think it depends quite much in the size of your business, your DI goals, the way you're communicating with your population, in the way you have to set these metrics. I think that one of the biggest challenges in my career is when I go to a global meeting or a global webinar, and the employees are asking me, show us progress, right? Because as I said, we all see DI in different perspectives. So what could be progress for me probably is not progress for some other people in Latin America or in APAC, because I think we have a global strategy for DI, but the results have to be locally driven. And the initiatives have to be locally driven, because locally is where you really understand who are your underrepresented groups, where are your marginalized communities, what are the biggest aspects where you need to focus. For example, talking about BIPOC communities in North America is very important, while probably in Africa we need to talk more about different tribes, and there are other countries where we need to talk about different populations coming in together. So DEI can be as broad as you can imagine, but then is how do we identify the right metrics for this? And I'm not sure if this, probably some other DI professionals are looking for the formula, but I think it's just identify the stage of DI where you are at, and then be able to see how short, mid, and long-term progress looks for you. With that, you will be able to establish the metrics that you need for this progress.
Indeed, and what you're really saying is there's a huge amount of nuances in this. So where we may be measuring tribes in Africa, we may be looking at in countries where it's still illegal to be gay, we may be looking at other metrics. And so it's really a case of where are organizations at on that maturity curve, whilst then also layering on top those cultural, those international nuances. Because as you say, unfortunately, there is no one cookie cutter model for success. We can amend the cookie cutter, but the question is, what does success look like within that region? Now, before we wrap up the podcast, because Ruben, I could talk to you forever and a day, talk to us a little bit about the pride that you have in Pride, because this is such a wonderful month to celebrate the progress of how far we have come in many instances when it comes to LGBTQ plus IA.
Yes, well, I'm a very proud gay man. I do believe that representation is important, and having the opportunity to be the global head for Syngenta Group for DEI does really brings that representation into place. And just as you were saying, having a global position makes you understand that not everything will resonate with everyone. And that's also part of the diversity. We cannot believe that diversity is only on the positive side. We have diversity where probably, as we have mentioned, in many countries, it's illegal to be gay. Some of them have death penalty. We have just been, just recently, Uganda has has strengthened their laws against LGBTQI, and I think this is why we need to still celebrating pride and fighting for rights and benefits all over the world, right? And I think that it all starts by understanding the space and the aspect. We have a global pride campaign in Syngenta Group. However, we understand that in some places, as I mentioned before, this is illegal. So what we're trying to do this year is to have our Pride campaign for those countries where Pride is accepted and the LGBTQI plus community is accepted, but then have a respect campaign for the countries where we are not able sometimes to even speak about the topic. So by just reinforcing the importance of respect and sometimes tolerance, we are just opening different roads for our employees to find this safe space. Sometimes I have heard from employees that are living in those countries where it's illegal. Sometimes by just knowing that my organization represents pride makes me feel safer, makes me feel that I belong to this company, because before I've been in companies that all I have heard is how rejected people from the LGBT community should be. So I think this is just what makes me to be more proud. It is to understand that doesn't matter how I think the effort is in magnitude. I know that there are people that are just listening to the messages and just feeling safe, or just feeling they belong. I think it's very important for us to keep representing pride, to be better allies wherever we need to act as an ally, to get informed, to understand why pronouns are important, to understand the different rights that the LGBTQI community have or don't have, and just to be patient, because sometimes it can be seen as rainbow washing, or John is all about LGBT community, and we now need to understand the way of living. And I believe this is important, right? As a society, we need to keep progressing in a way that everyone can find their place in our world, and they can live their lives and love who they want without feeling any restrictions. And sometimes we forget, because we are normalizing LGBT community in those countries where it's open and it's legal, but there are so many things to be done. And I think that by just acknowledging them and being part of how we can make this change, even with the way we vote or the representatives that we choose, we're making a huge difference for the underrepresented communities.
Mhm. Ruben, thank you so much. This has been an enlightening podcast, and one that I know will inspire many. In terms of summarizing, I'm kind of like, where do I start here? I mean, we've talked about the importance of being your authentic self. We've talked about the power of intersectionality, business strategy on a global level, the fact that this is a role that requires influence mile wide, mile deep. We must not forget how far we have come. And in particular, when it comes to LGBTQ plus IA and this being Pride Month, we must remember that in many countries it is still illegal. And so we must, as organizations, continue to fly the flag in order to represent those safe places and those safe spaces that allow people to truly thrive, because that's really all we are asking for. And some of the key pieces, Ruben, that really stood out to me is how you so well articulated the importance of diversity, inclusion, belonging, equity, and culture, but in the context of marketing and strategy. This is such an important and powerful lever that can drive true transformational change on a global scale by engaging many, many different communities. And if this podcast is not a reason to celebrate and really get behind the role of the Chief Diversity Officer, then frankly, I don't know what is, because this has just been such a remarkable conversation. So Ruben, I'll say thank you ever so much indeed. And I know everyone will have enjoyed this podcast very much.
Thank you, Leila. And if I can just give one final message to your audience, if you are not a DI professional and you are just part of the leadership team, or you are an individual contributor that have passion for DI, I think one of the best way for us to be accountable is engaging with the different activities, completing that training, joining the webinar or the town hall, including some DI-oriented messages in your meetings. Just by doing these small changes, you're doing a huge impact in the DI strategy. Sometimes, as we say, we want to measure those numbers, but when the numbers are not in, there are not going to be more resources. There's not going to be more airspace for us to talk about the different initiatives. So I think that just come forward, participate, engage, because the message is always good. DI, no matter where you look at it, has a positive message. And everything that we do will add on creating a better world. So just by engaging, I think you will make a huge difference. So thank you very much, Leila, for having me. It was a great pleasure to be here with you in your podcast.
Thank you so much. Engage, 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 everyone. Absolutely. What doesn't get measured doesn't get done. So we've got to all join together. My name is Leila McKenzie-Delis, the founder and CEO of Dial Global. You've been listening to the fantastic Ruben of Syngenta today. If you have been affected by any of the conversations in today's podcast, make sure you reach out to us here at the team. We are here to be able to help and to support. If you would like to check out the show notes as well, you're very, very welcome. Don't worry if you've missed any of those pearls of wisdom. We'll be making sure they go into the show notes and learnings will be accessible to all. You can download the podcast on your favorite podcast app, Apple, Spotify, or whichever you choose. In the meantime, take care. We will look forward to seeing you again very soon. In the meantime, you can visit us at www.dialglobal.org/podcast. See you very soon.